All right, so let's give it a start. Um, Welcome everyone to another session from Sitecore User Group India. And today we have Nick Wesselman and Thomas Desmond taking a session for us on Sitecore headless development with Next.js. So we'll be covering introduction to the Next.js, Sitecore JSS SDK for Next.js, and a quick demo for the developers here, right? And so a little bit about Nick. Nick is the product manager for developer experience at Sitecore, while Thomas is the JavaScript technical evangelist at Sitecore. And with that, over to you guys. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can go ahead.
All right, let's see. First off, great. So thanks for having me and Nick here today. We're excited to talk about the Sitecore headless development with Next.js. So Next.js support was added in the 16.0 release of the headless rendering suite. So that came out in late February. So we're excited to kind of talk about a really new feature that's come to JSS 16.0. First off, a little bit more about myself. I'm, again, the JavaScript technical evangelist at Sitecore. I'm pretty new to Sitecore here, just starting in January. I'm a longtime front-end developer and full-stack developer, so I come from pretty big development experience before this, doing a lot of Angular, TypeScript, JavaScript, .NET, quite a bit of AWS and IoT work as well. So a pretty large different developer background, but I'm excited to be the JavaScript technical evangelist at Sitecore now and really be the front-end advocate at Sitecore. Last, I am located in San Diego, California, so it's actually quite early for me right now, but I'm excited to be here today and happy to have been invited to speak at the user group. If you'd like to reach out to me after this, Twitter is a great place to reach out to me, Thomas J. Desmond. I'm also on LinkedIn as Thomas Desmond, or you can learn more about me on my blog, thetombomb.com. So jumping right in, what we want to cover today is the headless suite, just a little bit of an overview of that, what Next.js says in JSS, Jamstack, some of the Next.js benefits, why we chose it, where you can learn more, and then again, that demo at the end given by Nick. So a little bit of overview of the headless rendering suite. It is a JavaScript, or it's a toolkit that offers multiple ways of delivering headless implementations with Sitecore. So if you are a front-end developer interested in using JavaScript, you can use the JSS SDK. If you would like to use .NET, you can use the ASP.NET SDK, and then there's the headless module that is combined with the two. The headless rendering suite, again, it was released with a 16.0 release in late February. So that's really exciting to see the new release there. And with that new release, we added in support for Next.js. So Next.js support is in 16.0. One caveat to that is you do need to be on Sitecore 10.1 to access JSS 16.0, but we have released that feature inside of 16.0. And I'd like to actually pass it over to Nick for a few slides to explain a little bit more on the support for Next.js in JSS.
So yeah, like our other JavaScript SDKs, you'll find Next.js has a specific NPM package and a sample application. And we'll actually spin up that sample app in a bit here. And it does support all the existing features of JSS and Sitecore that you may be familiar with if you've done JSS development in the past. So you can use both the disconnected or mock developer workflow with code first, or you can use a connected or Sitecore first developer workflow. We do support tracking and analytics and personalization. This is only with server-side rendering. As Thomas will talk about, Next.js has a lot of rendering options. And obviously, if you do static generation, At least in the current release, we can't use the Sitecore tracker. And but we can do inline content editing and preview with the experience editor, even if you are using static generation in production. And that's through the power of the preview mode of Next.js. So just to cover some of the features of the SDK, and some of these, again, are shared with the rest of JSS. We do have a great starter template or sample app for Next.js. One difference with Next.js is that we offer a container-based starter as well, which we'll cover during the demo. And then we have your standard JSS functionality of rendering Sitecore placeholders from the layout service, components to help with rendering of specific Sitecore field types, especially in a way that's friendly for the experience editor. And of course, you get the Sitecore driven routes and layouts. So as content authors create new routes, we show you how in Next.js that those will those will become available in the Next.js application as well. And of course, one of the hallmarks of JSS is that, and our headless in general, is that you can use the experience editor to create new layouts, and those components will be dynamically driven through Sitecore placeholders. One unique thing we do in Next.js is component level data fetching. In Next, it's usually expected that you fetch all the data up front so that you can sort of cascade that down to all the components on the page. Because we do have this dynamic data-driven page layout, we can sort of upfront go request additional data based on the components in the page that have been placed through the experience editor. And finally, as mentioned before, we do have analytics and personalization support if you're using SSR. And this is through the layout service, which will, as with our other headless frameworks, will do tracking of the page event, and as well as triggering anything in the tracking field on the item. And the output will reflect any personalization rules you've set up on that layout as well. So one of the things I'm really excited about is how much Next.js simplifies JSS development. If you've done any JSS work in the past, you know there's a lot of modes. There's a lot of instances you need to run, and that we have to do a lot of work in our boilerplate to enable server-side rendering, including having a separate server bundle. But really, because Next.js is built out of the box for production pre-rendering, we don't have to have any extra boilerplate in our sample for server-side rendering or for managing state between the server and client. And we don't need the headless SSR proxy for production deployment. Next.js is ready to go for production hosting and scaling. And as I mentioned before, Next.js has this built-in preview mode for editor integration. And what this means is that we actually don't need to have a separate bundle for what was called integrated mode. You don't need to install Node.js on the Sitecore CM instance anymore. You don't need to deploy your JavaScript bundle to the CM. And you could avoid this with other JSS frameworks by using what's called the rendering host or HTTP render engine. But with Next.js, there's no extra setup required to use this. It's really the only way, and it's all ready to go in the app itself, in the sample we provide. And finally, as we'll see, we now have this container-based getting started option available. So if you are a Windows-based developer, if you are a full stack developer, or if you want to do what's called Sitecore first development, this is really an ideal way for you to get started, where we actually have a Visual Studio project included and container-based Sitecore instances, and basically a fully integrated Next.js app as well. So you can get everything you need for Sitecore first development with Next.js in this starter. But of course, we still have the JSS create option available with the mock Sitecore services.
Great. Thanks for the explanation, Nick. I can take over from here, and I want to talk to you now about why we've added support for Next.js. You've learned about how it works with JSS. Now, why have we chosen it? And really the main reason was the need for speed. Everyone wants faster speed, both on the implementation side and the delivery side, and Next.js is able to provide this. And one of the big reasons for that is it's built with Jamstack in mind. If you're not familiar with Jamstack, it is a architecture that combines JavaScript, APIs, and markup. So JavaScript for our dynamic functionalities on the front end, APIs for doing any sort of server-side operations using APIs, such as authentication, getting things from a database, or doing any sort of third-party services that require an API. And last is markup, which is how we are going to serve our HTML files. We generally create them as Markdown, and then using a static site generator, such as Next.js, we'll convert those to HTML files. So Jamstack is the combination of JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And you'll notice that these are not new things. So it's not a new technology stack. It's an architectural approach. It's an architecture for combining these three things. And when you combine these in a particular way and you support the Jamstack anchors of pre-rendering, fast delivery, and rehydration, you create a Jamstack application. So let's look a little bit deeper at these anchors here. First off is pre-rendering. Pre-rendering is this idea of creating static assets at build time. So we're kind of moving away from that traditional approach of where the user makes a request to our site, the server handles that request, it then creates the HTML, sends that back to the user, and then the user sees it. So that is considered server-side rendering and more the traditional approach. Here in Jamstack, we're using pre-rendering where we actually build out the content at build time. We host this static content on a CDN. So we're actually hosting it on the edge because it's static content. We don't need that server to handle the request. We already have the static content available to send out to our users. It's hosted on a CDN. And we can also do rehydration for any of that dynamic content that we do need. We can do that fetching on the client side. So Jamstack is this architecture of creating JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And Next.js is really built with Jamstack in mind. It's able to support this static site generation, fast delivery on a CDN, and rehydration. And Next.js, it's built on top of React. And it supports that static site generation as well as server-side rendering. So you can actually do a hybrid approach where you're doing both server-side rendering and static site generation. But I want to emphasize that one of the big reasons why we brought it into JSS 16.0 is because of that static site generation. It is built on top of React. So if you are going to be using Next.js, you are actually going to have a dependency on React. But one way that I've heard it described is React is the engine for your car, and then Next.js is that car built all around the engine. So you have a lot of those out-of-the-box features that Nick mentioned. So you have this powerful engine, and then this nice, beautiful, fast sports car built on top of it. Looking a little bit deeper at some of the features of Next.js, again, I really want to emphasize that server-side rendering capability, static site generation, as well as a hybrid model. A lot of enterprise companies are using it. Netflix and Hulu, these high traffic volume sites, are using Next.js, so it's enterprise ready. And really, it simplifies that JSS implementation by giving you a lot of the out-of-box features that Nick mentioned. Some other things that it has support for are TypeScript, which is great. I really love using TypeScript myself. The image optimization, I was actually just using this the other day. It was really nice just to be able to throw in an image and it's doing the auto scaling through a viewport, lazy loading of your images. It has can do API handling, error handling as well, component level CSS. Really just out of the box, Next.js has a lot of features that you usually would want, but it has them built in out of the box for you to use. So Next.js is really just an awesome framework built on top of React that is able to get you up and running very quickly, creating those static sites or server-side rendered or at a hybrid approach of both. And because this server-side or static site generation is so important, I want to just really reinforce this again. Static site generation is the idea of reducing or eliminating the processing of app rendering code at the time the user interacts with the page. So this is the approach of server-side rendering while the user hits your page. You then handle the request, you generate the content, and you send it over to the user. In static site generation, we're moving entirely away from this, where we actually generate that content at build time, and we have it ready for us to have that static content that we send out to the users. So this ahead of time pre-rendering is able to give us that extremely fast delivery where we can serve it up on a CDN directly on the edge and directly to our users. It gives us really fast performant websites. So Next.js, it's in 16.0 release that came out in late February. We really wanted to add Next.js because of its Jamstack support, that pre-rendering, fast delivery, and rehydration has support for all of these using static site generation, as well as that server-side rendering if you still need to have that traditional approach. So Next.js is just a really awesome framework that we've added to JSS that we're really excited to see what people build out with it. So there's also some learning resources if you'd like to learn more of JSS, sitecore.com. Next.js.org is great if you're wanting to just learn direct about Next.js. There's some 16.0 release notes, as well as the Sitecore 10.1, which is required to be using 16.0. So again, my name is Thomas Desmond. I'm really excited to have been here today. I'm the new JavaScript technical evangelist at Sitecore. I encourage you to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or find me on my blog. And at this point, I really am excited to turn it back to Nick to share the demo of using Next.js.
All right. Let's jump over to my screen here. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo of how you can get started with JSS and Next.js. And we have a couple ways we can go here. And so first off, let's take a look at using the JSS CLI to just create just a Next.js app that we can use in that what we call the disconnected mode. So if you don't have it yet, the first thing you're going to need is to install that JSS CLI. And so we're going to do a global install here of our CLI package. And mine will show up as an update since I already have it installed. So if you're not familiar, NPM has the ability to install command line tools, and with the -g flag, that's going to make it available in my path. And there we go. And now I have JSS available. So as it's telling me here, if I'm not in the context of a JSS project, it's going to give me really just one option, and that is to create a new project based on a particular template. And these templates are out on our GitHub, and we have them available for each JSS SDK, as well as a couple other samples around specific use cases. But we're going to do JSS create Sitecore user group, and we're going to use the Next.js template. And so it's going to pull down from GitHub, create, do a little file replacement based on the name of my project, and an npm install. But let's let that npm install run, and meanwhile, let's take a look at the JSS documentation, because I think we've done a pretty good job here of documenting your available getting started options that we're going through today. So we'll walk you through either full stack container option, which we'll do next, as well as the front end only option with JSS create, which is running now. And then in a moment, we're going to also create a new component. And there's the nice walkthrough of this in the documentation as well. If you're interested in getting into the architecture of how our JSS integration with Next.js works, we have a lot of great diagrams here too, so you can get deep pretty quickly if you like. But now let's go back to our CLI. It's going to tell us we can try out our application with cd sug. And instead of JSS start, why don't we first open this up in code? And in VS Code here, we can see our see the Next.js application it's created for us. If you've done Next.js work before, some of this should look pretty familiar to you. We have a Next config that we've pre-populated with some rewrites and as well as some additional Webpack config that we add. We have an environment file that configures some environment variables. In a Next.js application, one of the most important paths is this pages path. This is what determines routing in a Next.js application. And we can see this ... path page here. And this is basically a catch-all path for Next.js. This is what's going to allow us to basically catch any path coming in that's requested and attempt to resolve it in Sitecore with the layout service. So, and then you can see by default, we have get static paths and get static props, which tells Next.js that we want to statically generate this this route. And it's going to get the data using what we call the page props factory. And among other data that the page props factory is going to request, it is going to fetch the Sitecore layout service. So that's basic overview of how routing works with our Next.js app. There's much more detail on that in our docs. Let's go ahead and do a JSS start. And this is gonna, in addition to starting the Next.js app, is gonna start what we call our disconnected proxy. And like other JSS frameworks, that's gonna use these JSON files, or rather YAML files, in the solution to basically mock out a Sitecore page, or as it were, a series of pages and the components on them. It's also possible to import this using what's called the code first workflow. And what's nice about this is that if I'm a front-end developer on Mac or Linux, I don't need to run a Sitecore instance. I can get a feel for the developer experience and do some basic things in this disconnected mode. Now, warning that disconnected mode is pretty limited compared to an actual Sitecore instance. And for any non-trivial project, at some point you are going to want to move to the Sitecore first workflow. But it is a great way to get started and certainly to get a feel for what Sitecore JSS development is like. So, but let's go ahead, let's shut that down and take a look at our other getting started option. And that is Sitecore containers. So for our container-based example, perhaps a bit surprisingly, we actually use .NET New templates. .NET New templates are a feature of .NET Core, and the reason for this is that that's how we deliver our template for ASP.NET Core as well, and how we deliver our container-based Sitecore instance templates. This one, though, will, in addition to creating that container-based instance, will also actually invoke that JSS create and add a Next.js application. So it's a bit long command because we have to include the Sitecore NuGet feed here as well, but we're gonna do an install of this package that includes the develop the Sitecore DevX templates. And we'll see afterward that in my list of templates, I now have both our ASP.NET and Next.js getting started options. So now I can do .NET New, Sitecore, Next.js, getting started, and give it a name. And this is going to ask me to, if it can do a couple commands after creating the solution. And yes, go ahead and do a .NET tool restore. This gives us the Sitecore CLI for serialized items. And then we'll see this template also contains a PowerShell script to create a the JSS project. And we'll tell it, yes, please go ahead. And this will create the JSS project, manipulate it a little bit, and do the npm install. rather than waiting for that and for the containers to start up, I actually have one running already over here with a Sitecore XP0 instance, as well as a running Next.js service. So let's take a look at that. And so here, in addition to, I'm gonna clean up a little bit here. In addition to the Next.js project, much like the one we just looked at, we also have a Visual Studio project for deploying into the Sitecore instance. And we have some serialized items. So here we can work sort of Sitecore first out of the box. And then we have our Docker files that do things like add the Sitecore headless services module. If you are not working in containers, if you're working from JSS Create, you would need to install a separate Sitecore instance and install the headless services module. With this option, it's all done for you already. So, and if we take a look at this instance, it's going to look very similar to what we were just looking at. It's our JSS style guide again. And I have it running here in the content editor. So let's go ahead and add a new component to this solution. So I'm going to change into my Next.js app in the VS Code terminal here. So here I'm in context of that folder there. And I'm going to use a JSS command scaffold. And this uses, this is basically a quick way of creating a new component. If I was working code first, this would create a code first definition as well. In my case, it's just going to create a new React component that, in this case, expects a rendering and data source with a heading field on it, just as an example. There's actually a little bug in our scaffold in this release that gives it the wrong line endings, thus the squigglies. Fix that quick. But so let's go ahead and, since we're working Sitecore first, I'm going to jump back into the content editor and create this component. So in a team project, you might have some Sitecore developers doing this separately from the front-end developers, and there are different workflows that out there in the community for enabling more of a concurrent development there. It may be a topic for another user group presentation. But as with any Sitecore component, I'm going to create my data source template first. And since it's expecting since the default expects a heading, we'll do that just for expediency, and we'll add an image and a link. Image field, link field. Good there. Now let's go ahead and create a rendering. And with any Sitecore headless project, you are always creating JSON renderings. And this is basically just means it's just going to get serialized out as JSON to the layout service. It has no presentation of its own in the Sitecore instance. So we'll call it sug demo to match what we scaffolded. We see that in this site, we are putting our data source items in a page components folder. And we'll add our data source template. And save that. And finally, we want to make sure we can insert this onto our page. So let's add it to the placeholder settings for the main placeholder. and save that. So at this point, let's see what happens. Can we go ahead? Can we open this in the experience editor already? And can we edit? We add our SUG demo component to the page. We now need to create a data source for it. Okay, good so far. And there we are. Wow, it's already here. How is that? I mean, this was, we said this was in a container, right? How is that possible? And this is getting into one of the great features of Next.js from a developer perspective, and that is what they call fast refresh or hot reloading. So we'll see that based on my changes here, that we basically we recompiled automatically the new component. My new component was registered by the JSS watcher, and Next.js recompiled everything for me. So our component is already here, and I can start editing and working with it already. So, but let's update this to use our new fields as well. So let's see here, we added an image, which is going to be an image field type. So we are working in TypeScript with React. So we have to declare our prop type, which actually ends up creating a very nice developer experience and gives us some compile time checking that we wouldn't have otherwise. And a link, which is a link field. And I want to grab the image and link components from this, our Next.js NPM package as well, so I can render with those. Let's get rid of this text, add a little additional error checking here, and we'll add the image props, and we see we get some nice autocomplete here from TypeScript. So we want to pull from the fields, and there is our image field. And then let's wrap it with a link. Our link and rich text components for Next.js do support the client-side routing that Next.js offers. So you will get client-side prefetching and route changes like any Next.js link. All right, so let's see, we added all that. Let's jump back. Whoa, how did that happen? My code is already, my changes are already here. And this is again that Next.js fast refresh, and it does work in the experience editor, which is obviously, I think, makes for a pretty great developer experience. Let's fill out these additional fields. CSS logo, and we'll insert a link to another page and save. And I'm going to jump back over here and do a full site publish just to make sure we get all our renderings and templates as well. And here we go. We have our new component added to the page. Now let's keep making some changes though. See what happens. Let's say instead, I think I want this to be, let's actually make this a NH2. Oh, it's changing for me. And let's do something really awful, like add a, whoop, if I could spell, marquee. And obviously VS Code doesn't like that, but I guess Chrome is still cool with it. So very basic introduction to creating a new project and doing some component development with JSS and Next.js. Thank you all for listening. We have plenty of time for questions, so happy to answer. You can find me on Twitter, or I'm ever present on Sitecore Slack as well if you have any follow-up questions.
All right, so we have some questions in the comments here. Most of them are answered by Thomas right now, but in that case, what I'll do is I'll ask. I think David had most of the questions. So David, I'll unmute your mic.
Sure. Yeah, I think most of them have already been answered by Thomas. So one thing I found with the JavaScript first approach, or whatever it's called, the disconnected approach, is that I found kind of the YAML syntax difficult to remember, and just kind of it was neat in concept. In practice, it was kind of painful. Just to like get the right syntax and all of that.
And is that is that YAML itself, or our specific schema?
I guess both, because I'm not that familiar with YAML, but also the specific schema, how placeholders are handled. There's a kind of a lot of trial and error. At least I think this was about a year ago when I looked, when I was just doing some POC work with it. And it, like, I figured it out eventually, but the at least at the time, the documentation on the exact syntax of how to lay everything out, there wasn't kind of a clear guide on that, and also kind of the lack of IntelliSense there meant kind of, let me try something, see if this works. Oh,
right.
That wasn't right.
No, that's great feedback.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if there's any additional support, like any way to get IntelliSense in that, or any way to either read directly from Sitecore, or I had asked if there was any similar to GlassMapper with C# to do some code generation of creating strongly typed models, since we're using TypeScript.
Right. I mean, you can certainly work directly against Sitecore. I mean, that's kind of the Sitecore first workflow, as we call it. So you can, I think almost every JSS framework has a start connected option, and with that, you can work directly against Sitecore, and usually with that sort of workflow, I mean, if you're working full stack yourself and creating the Sitecore templates, then you create what you need, you can add it to a page, and then you can see what the layout service output will be for that, and create the corresponding models. I think I mentioned, it might have been you who asked in Slack recently, or someone, about code gen to TypeScript from Sitecore, and you could certainly do that with community tools like Leprechaun. Otherwise, we are in the roadmap looking more at how we can enable what we call contract first development, where you would potentially create, say, either a JSON schema or a TypeScript type first, in cooperation between the front end and Sitecore team. And then from there, maybe have some code gen tools, or at least validation tools, so that the Sitecore team can be creating templates and maybe some C# code to shape the layout service output, while the front end team uses something like Storybook to mock out the components and then integrate later in the sprint. So we're certainly looking at ways we can improve that workflow. With regard to the route files themselves, you can work with them as JSON. I don't know if we have a public example of that or not. that they actually were JSON originally during when JSS was created. But also, I think YAML schema is starting to mature a bit. And I think I saw recently, like Visual Studio was adding support. I assume VS Code as well. So that might be an option for us to at least help with the basic, sort of editing of those and getting IntelliSense and validation and all that. I assume sort of just a YAML plugin for VS Code would at least help ensure that your syntax is correct. But
Sure.
yeah, I agree. It would be great if we could actually have a schema against that too. Taking notes. Sorry, so I kind of went on there. Does that answer your question?
David, does that answer your question? Okay, yeah. So yeah, David mentioned
Okay. Yeah, cool.
All right.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. There were great questions, and thanks, Nick, for the insights on those. So next we have a couple of questions from Surendra. What I'll do is I'll ask him also to unmute because he had a couple of them which I saw. Surendra, you want to
Yeah.
go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Varun. Hi, Nick. So
Hi.
this was good presentation. We are impressed with the Next.js, but the problem is that in our environment we are using Angular development for the JSS. Surprisingly, not the React. Yeah, it's Angular.
Yep.
So the way you have developed right now, I was just a bit confused whether it was the disconnected, because you have started with as a disconnected approach, but then ultimately it will be deploy as a automatically deploy as a connected, and then we can work in the experience editor as well. So my question is that if we are not using the Next.js, if we are using the Angular, then I think we need to fire the manual deployment JSS deployment command.
Yep. Yeah. So one thing I didn't show that I can share quickly here is what actually happens when the first time you start up the container-based starter, because it still does use JSS create and JSS deploy, but it basically does what you would do if you were looking to basically move immediately to Sitecore first development with JSS. Even with Sitecore first, we do recommend using the deploy for an initial push. So the first time you start up this, the container-based starter, it's going to push a few items, including an API key. But then it's going to do that JSS deploy and create the JSS site using the code first route files and so on. Then it'll run a Sitecore publish using the CLI, but then it's going to do a pull. And what's actually this starter includes is serialization configurations for all the starter items as well. So basically what this means is on first run, it'll deploy, it'll pull in those items, and then from there on you can work Sitecore first, and you can use the Sitecore CLI to continue to pull in serialized items into the solution.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, got it.
So you could, if it working in Angular, you could certainly do something similar if you wanted to rapidly start up new Angular based solutions.
Yeah, it need to convince my client. They don't want to shift it to the this one. So the another question is, yeah. So the another question is that right now, as a .NET developer, we have the two headless model available for the development. One is the JSS way. This Next.js looks very promising, but another is the ASP.NET Core as well, which looks very. I mean, as a developer, I'm more comfortable in that. So now it's very confusing for us as all the developers. I hope this is the same question that other developers are also feeling, that when to use which development framework.
Well, I think we're trying to be a little more agnostic when it comes to headless Sitecore development. We have There's a large world of JavaScript developers out there who we want to work with our platform, and there are a lot of advantages to Next.js and the ability to do Jamstack architecture and so on. But Jamstack isn't needed or isn't a fit for all solutions, and there are a lot of partners and customers who are more comfortable with .NET. So I'm product manager for both SDKs. I love both languages myself, and so we're trying to enable both .NET developers and JavaScript developers to work with Sitecore on an ongoing basis in modern architectures. So on a particular project, the question is going to be, what are the project requirements? What are the UX requirements? What are the scaling requirements? What are the integration requirements? And what is the technology expertise of you and your customer? All those are going to factor into your choice of which SDK to use. I mean, .NET, I'm sure some JavaScript developers are going to disagree with me, but I think it is superior in a lot of ways when it comes to heavy integrations and things that do require that server-side rendering. And we are looking at Blazor as an option that would give you the ability to do the rich clients experience while still working in .NET. But that's something we're sort of actively evaluating as a technology.
Yeah, we are very eagerly waiting for the Blazor to be introduced as one other option. Yeah. So if it will be there, yeah, I will be the first who is going to take that.
Excellent. I'll hold you to that.
Thanks, Nick.
Right. Great questions, Surendra. Yeah, so I think we don't have any more questions. So thank you, Nick, and thank you, Thomas, for taking time and sharing things about Next.js with us. It's been a pleasure having you here, and we always hope that there are some more insights you can share, similar to the one which we just shared here. So so it was great having you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Cheers. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Bye. See you in the next
Bye.
session.
Bye.